So absolute value inequalities. You've been doing absolute value equations. Very, very, very similar. You're not going to do much different. There's just an added step to come up with your answer. Let me just write on here what exactly an absolute value inequality looks like. Remember, it's just an absolute value. So 3x plus 2 would be an absolute value. And then in this time, you're going to have an inequality sign. So you might have something like less than 4. That's what an absolute value inequality looks like. So what does its solution, how do we write the solution to an absolute value inequality? But it's going to be very similar to that you saw in compound inequalities. So for an example, you might have an answer that looks like -3 is less than x is less than 9. Or you might have something like x is less than or equal to -9, or x is greater than or equal to 12. So notice you have an and and an or. Those are your compound inequalities. I'm going to be demonstrating in GMM for you on reminding you how to graph a compound inequality. So what do? So solving an absolute value inequality, a lot of this is going to be very similar to what you already know. So first thing, I'll remind you, remember the absolute value can be found under Math Num. You should all know where that's at this point. So remember, you are going to take and you're going to put the left side of the equation in y1. You're going to put the right side of the equation in y2. And you're going to graph. If you don't see your intersection points, that's where you're going to do zoom 0 or zoom 3 enter. Remember, you have to see those intersection points on your screen. Then you're going to do your second trace. You're going to find those point of intersections, just like you did for absolute value equations. But there's the next step. The next step, I call the x values of the intersections your critical values. Not all people may refer to them that way. So when you find those intersection points, they are critical in terms of answering the question. They are not the answer, though. There's more to it. And so if you look at the next step, it says to determine solution, if the absolute value is less than or equal to, look for the part of the graph of the absolute value below the line. So less than, remember, is below. We think of it as below the line. So in the example that I have here, I have two pictures of two different situations you might see. So if we look at the first picture that I have there, the blue represents the absolute value, the red represents your line. It's not always going to be the case in the calculator, but it's going to be very similar. If we're looking for less than, what part of the blue line is below the red line? That's going to be part of your answer. So it's going to be this area here is below. And I always think if you can make a triangle, that's an and. Your answer is going to look like that. And if you look at the next example over, the red line in the blue graph, which part of the graph of the blue is below the red line? So the below the red line would be this part of the graph. And since there's a gap there, that's going to be an or. And so your answer is going to look like that. The numbers are coming from those critical values, those points of intersection. If the absolute value is greater than or equal to, look for the part of the graph of the absolute value that is above the line. Greater is above now. So if we look at our example, we have a blue absolute value, a red line. What part of the blue line is above the red line? It would be this part. And so again, that's an or because there's a gap, so your answer is going to look like that. If you look at the other example, greater than above the red line is that part. Again, if I can make a triangle, I think of that as an and that's what your answer is going to look like. So let's go ahead and do some examples. So example 1, same thing we've done. This part is not going to be anything new. This is going to go in your y1. This is going to go into your y2. Go ahead and put those into your calculator. So now in the calculator, we're going to put the absolute value of -4x minus 9 into y1 and 2 into y2. So remember, absolute value is math over to num. The first one, absolute, remember yours might say ABS. Then you're going to type -4x minus 9. Make sure you're using the negative for the 4x and not the minus sign. In y1. In y2, you're going to type 2. So that's what I have on my screen. You're going to hit zoom 6. So in this case, we do see both of the graphs. So, and just like the previous GMM practice that we were doing, we need to find those intersection points. We need to find the intersection point there, and we need to find the intersection point here. So we're going to do the same thing we've been doing. So we're going to go second trace. You're going to go down to number 5, and then you're going to move the blinking cursor over to, I always start left to right, over to near the left one. Hit enter, 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 and you get a negative 2.75. So we would write negative 2.75 at that point on our paper. Now we're going to convert that here shortly. So then you're going to go second trace again down to number 5, but this time we need to move it over to this point right here. It just has to be closer to that point than it's the other. It doesn't have to be on it. And then hit enter, 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 and we get, if you see, we get a negative 1.75. So that's the points that we need. And again, just right here for now, negative 1.75. We will actually go ahead and convert that here shortly. So to convert negative 2.75 to a fraction, remember what we do. We do negative 2.75 on our calculator. We're going to hit the math button, which is right here. And then you're just going to hit enter, enter, and it'll give you negative 11 fourths. So negative 2.75 is equal to negative 11 fourths. Negative 1.75, hit the math button again, enter, enter, and you get a negative 7 fourths. So negative. Your graph looked like this. You used your calculator to find the critical values, which this one here you found was negative 11 fourths, and this one was negative 7 fourths. So then when we look at our graph, the absolute value is bigger than 2. So what part of your graph is bigger than the line, greater than the line, above the line? It's going to be that part right there. And so your answer in GMM would be type x is less than or equal to negative 11 fourths, or x is greater than or equal to a negative 7 fourths. I'm going to go now to GMM. I'm going to show you how to put that in GMM and to graph that compound inequality. We got the answer of x is less than or equal to a negative 11 fourths, or x is greater than or equal to negative 7 fourths. So we're going to just type that here. So x is less than or equal to a negative 11 fourths, and then we're going to say or x is greater than or equal to a negative 7 fourths. So we got that as our answer. So we'll click the check mark and get the green dot. But now this is where I wanted to make sure. There are 2 numbers up here. So notice there's only one spot to put a number. This is where you have to hit this button right here. So you have to make sure it has 2 marks. See the 2? And because this is, so let's just go ahead and type in our numbers here first. So we have a negative 11 fourths is our smallest, so that one's going to go here. And this is what makes it easy if you do left or right in your calculator, because you get them left or right for the number line. And you get a negative 7 fourths is here. So we're going to, right? So since this is an or, and this one here is x is less than or equal to negative 11 fourths, you're going to click on one that has a solid dot, put it on this 11 fourths, but because it's an or, it's going to go that way. Not all ors go that way, but in this case, it's going to go that way. And then we do the same thing for 7 fourths. So we're going to put a dot on negative 7 fourths, and then we're going to hit over here so that it goes in that direction. So that's the appropriate compound graph for the compound inequality x is less than or equal to negative 11 fourths, or x is greater than or equal to negative 7 fourths. Click the check mark, and you should get your smiley faces. Example 2. Go ahead and put this in y1 and this in y2. So you're to put negative 6 plus the absolute value of negative x minus 1 into y1 and 8 into y2. So I already have that done. And then you do zoom 6. Unfortunately, with zoom 6, we do not see the intersection points on our screen, so we might have to try zoom 0. In this case, we still don't see the intersection points on our screen, so let's try zoom 3, enter. Now we do see the intersection points, so we see that the absolute value is this blue line here, and 8 is this red line. So we need to find the intersection points of those 2 lines. So go ahead on your paper, draw that sketch, And now let's find those intersection points. So we're going to find, I always do left to right, so find this one over here first. So second trace, number 5. Move the cursor closer to that point. It doesn't have to be exactly on it. Hit enter, 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 and you get that that point is a negative 15. Do the same thing for the second one. So now we're going to check this point right here. So second trace, number 5, move the cursor closer to that. It doesn't have to be exactly on it, just needs to be closer than the other. Hit enter, 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 and we see that that point is 13. Those are our critical values that we need to figure out with what our answer is. Your graph on your calculator looked like this. Something very similar. The critical values that you found on the calculator, this was negative 15, this one was 13. Now, if we look at our inequality, we want to know when is the absolute value less than the line, below the line. It would be this area. And this again makes that triangle. And so this is an and. Your answer would be written, smallest to largest, negative 15 is less than x is less than 13. You're going to now see me show you this in GMM also. So we saw on our calculator that the answer is x is greater than or equal to negative 15 and less than or equal to 13. So we're going to type that into GMM just as we would as we write it. So negative 15 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 13. Remember, these need to go smallest to largest. So that's our answer, how we type it. And we'll check that. And now to graph that, remember, you need to choose the 2 marks, this button right here, and there's an equal sign, and it's a between. So we're going to type our, down here, we're going to type a negative 15. We're going to type our 13 here. And we need that graph, since it's an equal sign, it's going to be a solid dot, and they're going to connect each other because it's a between. So we need that one right there. So we click there, we'll click there, and that will be the graph. And that's a compound graph. And we get our smiley faces. Example 3. This side's going to go on y1. This side goes in y2. So in y1 we put negative 11. In y2 we put the opposite of the absolute value of negative 4 plus 2x minus 5. Now we're going to look for the intersection points for these. So again, zoom 6. Zoom 6 does not give us the full graph. So if you do zoom 0, in this case we do see both intersection points. So remember, this here is your absolute value side, and this here is your value of a negative 11. So we need to figure out where these points of intersections are, which is what I'm calling the critical values. So you do second trace, number 5, get close to the one on the left, hit enter, 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 and you see that that value is a negative 1. So record a negative 1 in that value on your paper. And then second trace again, number 5. This time we need to move over to the far right intersection point, hit enter, 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 and we see that that value is 5. From your calculator, your graph should have looked like this. Your critical points that you found this one to be negative 1 and this one to be 5. Looking at the inequality, the absolute value is less than the line, so below the line. What part of the graph is below the line? It's going to be this part. So they're separated, so that's an or. So your answer in GMM would be x is less than negative 1 or x is greater